I do want to, as we talk about, we've got a number of back-to-school updates just because there's so much happening new in our school district. And one thing I want to make sure that everybody understands, we keep hearing this term SEL, and we keep hearing, we define it as social emotional learning. But as educators, I think sometimes we fall into a trap of edu-speak, where we think the meaning of something is obvious to the entire community, and we love acronyms and all these different ways to. I think the military may be the only group of people that love acronyms more than we love acronyms. But you got this idea of SEL, and I wanted to take a few minutes tonight to have Mr. Pender come and just kind of talk about what is it. I mean, because you see it, we just talked about it in our ESSER 3 budget. It's in our back to school plan. We talk about it a lot in these conversations. And again, I just wanted to take some time tonight so we could just have some conversation about what it is and what it looks like in our schools, so that we can all have a common definition of SEL. So, Mr. Pender, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good morning, evening, Madam Chair and board members. I'm ahead in the morning already, and
we're getting there.
Dr. Lilia comes early, doesn't it? So I want to go back and cover. I'm thinking 4 o'clock comes early in my time, so go back and cover where we've been with SEL and where we're going, so you have kind of an overview. For three decades now, school counselors have been serving all students in 3 domains, probably even longer than 3 decades. Academics, learning to learn. We do careers, learning to work. And we do social emotional, learning to live. Social emotional has been that school counselor thing for a long time. What started happening is in 2016, 2017, SEL, social emotional learning, moved to the national and state attention. And the reasons behind it was the increase in mental health disorders with our youth that we're receiving. What we saw was 1 in every 6 child was having a mental health disorder. 60% of them were not getting treatment for it. And then the suicide rates were also being noticed. And you look at that, especially with 8 to 12-year-olds. What we saw was a 60% increase in suicide. 42 states reported an increase in suicide. Lexington County county of Lexington was number 2 in the state with suicides, with the youngest being 5 that completed suicide. So it was getting a lot of national attention to what was happening with mental health. So what is the definition for social emotional learning? Social emotional learning is the process of developing self-awareness, self-control, and interpersonal skills that are vital for school, work, and life success. It is about soft skills, or as we with our strategic plan, our power skills. Overcoming obstacles, building positive relationships, collaboration, managing your emotions, feelings, and showing empathy, achieving goals so you become a positive member of society. What does it actually fall down to? Maslow's hierarchy of need. If a child's hungry in the morning, if they don't feel safe at home, if they don't feel like they belong to anybody, if they don't feel good about who they are, that's a deficit. And what we finally connected with academics is, if a child's already down here already with social emotional, they can't achieve their max academically. So we have to meet those needs so we get the best outcome with academics. So as you remember, we had a response to what was happening in 2016, 2017. We had suicide risk assessments. Our district was one of the first that actually put a screener in place, not a diagnostic tool. We implemented our mental wellness teams because everybody had a little bit. Nurse had a piece, counselors had a piece, and we brought these teams together. This is what a child has. It's that safety net. Now what do? 504, social worker. Where does this child need help? School counselors, we provide short and term counseling, 4 to 6 weeks. No long-term therapeutic work. So we did a memorandum of understanding with Lexington County Community Mental Health, and we brought those counselors into the school district to provide long-term therapeutic help. They also helped us with crisis and grief and loss. Then we did a memorandum of understanding with life changes for intensive family services after hours in the home at night and at weekends, and with sexual trauma in the Midlands to do sexual assault victims. And then with our staff and our secondary students, we added to the ID card the National Suicide Prevention Line, and we also put the safety tip line. That initiative by our district is now state law. So that we put into place. What happened with COVID SEL? South Carolina Department of Education released their web page that launched SEL and criteria for districts. They require that all districts have a triage team. We already had our mental health teams already in place, so we could do that. We increased our Lexington County community counselors in the school. We did SEL check-ins with the kids in the morning, just really quick, and how you doing, building relationships. And we did SEL lessons on our power skills. The state required surveys of staff and students to find out how well you're doing. We included our parents because we had food deprivation, loss of jobs to find out what they were doing. So where are we going? One of the first things South Carolina Department of Education says we have to have an SEL screener for staff and students. We have contracted with Terrence Metrics. We're doing that right now with our staff. And then with our students, we will do middle school and elementary, grades 3 through 12. That will be in the month of September. October will be our high school, and Lula will be November. Now, with this survey, it is active consent. A parent actually has to say, I want my child to take the survey and sign for it. Otherwise, it can't be given. So it is active consent. We will continue with our mental wellness teams. We have our Engaging with Compassions project. We partner with Blue Cross and the University of South Carolina with 8 elementary schools. They're going to partner and help us, train us free of charge, and do follow-up with us for 3 years. It is an intensive training. They start with a 911 call from a child who is experiencing abuse. They take you through a mock house of abuse. They take you from trauma-informed to trauma-sensitive. They take you looking at punitive things differently to how to work with child, why they came from certain directions, and also about recovery rooms. Adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. We now have 25 of our staff trained that we can go out and train it ourselves inside of our school instead of having to go out and hire somebody else. We're going to continue to do those SEL check-ins in the morning. We're going to continue to have SEL lessons to build those power schools. We just got a $10,000 grant from the Hayden Hurst Foundation, NEPRON, that we're going to do a pilot with the in-focus curriculum that will be at Deerfield Elementary and Pillion Middle School. We just signed another memorandum of understanding with the Dickerson Center. Dickerson Center will provide free counseling services and bilingual. They will help with our mental wellness teams because oftentimes schools get stuck. What do we do next? They're going to be our bridge to community and say, hey, we know this is out here in the community. Let's get the child there. So they're going to help us bridge that gap. We're looking at an agency called Care Solace. What they do is a consultation survey with parents we can refer to, and they help you 24 hours a day, 365 days a week, get you to mental health services. They vet our providers. They work with our people we have in agreements with. They help a parent navigate the insurance. Your insurance takes this. Well, this is who you can help. They try to get that child within 72 hours into a facility. They then follow up. Did it work well? Did you like it? Do you need somebody else? So we're doing that. And we're going to have an SEL lead school counselor because this is a lot of work to coordinate. We need somebody checking in with the schools. Did it work? What's the fidelity on it? Evaluating the program to make sure it all takes place. So to summarize, the fact is, mental health is still a very much an issue that is on the forefront when we look at it. When we think about we had a 9% increase this last year when we talk about anxiety and depression. In 2020, 77,470 students across the nation expressed suicidal ideation. Suicide is now the second cause of death among youth 10 to 19. In 2016, 2,555 students nationally completed suicide. In 2019, that number is 5,485. Just that much of a difference. 38,000 kids in South Carolina called that national hotline. The youngest here in our state was 7. In Greenville County, they just announced an 800% increase in suicides. And in South Carolina in 2019, 123 youth completed suicide, 109 were boys. So it still is a very real issue. So what we don't want to have, social isolation, depression, anxiety, exclusion, suicidal ideation, trauma, bullying, and neglect. What we want to use SEL for is to build these outcomes. Increase coping skills, supportive relationships, positive self-esteem and confidence, hope, resilience, excellent mental health. We got to get past that stigma. We all say, hey, we want good physical health. If you don't feel good, go see the doctor. So what is wrong with saying, I want good mental health? If you don't feel good, go see the therapist. There should be no stigma behind it. And lastly, we want inclusion. We want every child to feel good about who they are, where they come from, and to feel positive, because we can't afford to have the opposite. That's what we want to do with SEL in our district. Are there any questions?
I have a couple questions, but there's nothing that needs to be answered tonight. But I did just want to say thank you, and I liked a lot of what I heard in there. Follow-up, evaluation, train the trainer. And this has a lot of substance. This isn't just, acronyms. It looks like we are partnering with corporations, local businesses, whatever, that we're actually going to make an impact here. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Hold on. I do want to address this because every now and then SEL gets misinterpreted. We hear a lot about CRT nowadays, and SEL is part of that conversation. Can you explain to us why that is not an accurate definition?
Sometimes CRT gets in about, things about putting down children where they came from, et cetera. SEL has nothing to do with that at all, because you're building positive relationships. You're building self-esteem. You want every child to feel good about who they are, where they come from. So to me, it perplexes me to why it gets linked together, because it's never been that way. Never has been, but social media is what it is. And it's gotten tied in there a couple of times it shouldn't have. But social emotional learning is to make sure our children are well taken care of. That's the bottom line.
Okay, thank you. And just speaking of that, Ms. Gaskins, can you just talk about, just for the record, our curriculum as it relates to CRT?
Sure. I'd just like to make a connection first to what Mr. Pender shared, and that we are very committed to making sure that, aligned to our vision and mission, our schools are places where all students and adults feel seen, heard, and valued. And we spend a great deal of time in our professional learning and our leadership development talking about how we do that. And we are very committed to designing a system where every student can be successful. And so one thing we discuss is curriculum and how it is designed. And so in Lexington One, we use the South Carolina College and Career Ready Standards to design our curriculum. We also embed our power skills. We want to make sure that students are good communicators, good collaborators, have integrity. But aligned with those South Carolina College and Career Ready Standards, critical race theory is not included in those standards, and it is not included in our K-12 student curriculum. We really want to promote a culture where we celebrate and learn and grow together.
Okay, thank you. If we could, as we move on now to Howard Bissell and Chris Rabin, thank you for waiting patiently. But we did want to give you just a moment to talk about our online learning and personal pathway. So if you could, if the two of you would give us a little update on Lula and the types of work we're doing virtually.
Thank you, Dr. Little, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm happy to bring you an update this evening on elementary Lula, but first an update on some of the work that we're doing to ensure continuity and quality of learning during student quarantines as we enter back into the school atmosphere for the 21-22 school year. In preparation for the start of this school year, we wanted to be very intentional about lifting up the successes we saw last year and operationalizing those successes moving forward. We reached out to a variety of professionals with instructional expertise and experience in working with quarantine students last year to develop a list of successful strategies for providing continuous instruction and quality instruction for students when inevitably we'll have some that do go out on quarantine this fall. What we found was that consistency wherever possible is the absolute greatest driver of success in the events that students must be quarantined. And so we're starting across the board this year with a consistent communication about weekly expectations that can be found in a central hub of resources for each teacher's classroom. So all of our teachers within a school are going to post what we call a week at a glance document. in the same place in their learning management system each week so that students and families can get used to going to one place to find learning goals, assignments, and directions for what's happening in class each day. And so we know that establishing that consistent practice will help to easily lead a student to the same place to find how they can stay connected to their class if they were to be in quarantine. We also learned that a good balance between live interaction with the teacher and independent work is important when a student's out on quarantine. It's not feasible for a teacher to teach both quarantine students online all day as well as the students in her class. However, we know that each school is working through a number of potential strategies that'll help them to provide consistent, balanced instruction when their students are quarantined. And so that might look like a teacher turning on a Zoom meeting while he or she is providing a short 15-minute mini lesson, and so that students can engage and be connected to the classroom, and then maybe directing them to some materials and assignments posted in a learning management system to extend their learning on those topics or those learning targets. Teacher might even record a lesson and post it in a learning management system for students to view, or set up office hours for students to meet with them live via Zoom meeting during their planning period, just like they would be open to working with kids and supporting them if they were in the building to come see them in their planning period, if they were physically present in the building. So, the goal is not to create a separate online classroom for our teachers to facilitate, but to leverage the tools that we have to provide a quality learning experience for our students that's timely and supports the needs of those students. And finally, because we know things can happen fast, we're really stressing that it's going to be important for students to take their devices and their chargers home daily. I know that seems kind of like a no-brainer, but we got to be really intentional about that in case we were to need to shift, in short notice. So before moving on to my update on our elementary Lula program, I'd be happy to answer any questions about those recommendations for quarantine instruction.
Howard, can I add one thing? And I think this probably goes without saying, but it's going to take us this week to get prepared for what Howard just described, especially as we are beginning school with some students already in isolation or quarantine. And so our major goals for this week are to kind of establish some of that infrastructure, make sure all our students have devices, and some are able to go ahead and engage in learning, but we're trying to get everything in place quickly so that we can do what Howard just described.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Gaskins. So today, August 17th, 2021, I'm happy to report that through an amazing collaborative effort, we built and launched an elementary Lula program in just about a week. So let's talk about that.
Didn't you say that last year too? It's like,
Yeah, something like that. It was close. So this slide in no way captures all the hard work, coordination, and collaboration that took place among our human resources department, our instruction department, information technology, finance operations, communication departments. But I think most importantly, I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize our school administrators and elementary Lula teachers for stepping up and answering the call to serve our stakeholders on such short notice. They've been selfless, agile, dedicated to getting this program started in the best way possible in a very short period of time. I'm telling you, we truly have the best administrators and teachers in the business, so a huge shout out to them tonight. As you can see in this brief timeline here, our registration launched on August 2nd, and once we identified there was a significant demand by the end of that week, on the 6th, we moved at lightning speed to coordinate staffing, enrollment, logistics, and communication to go live this morning with 18 teachers and about 500 students. So we still have several things to iron out over the next couple of weeks. I appreciate everybody's patience as we get there, but we will get there. If you look at a breakdown of attendance, or enrollment rather, we're sitting at about 507 as of this morning when we pulled these numbers together. It's not the prettiest slide in the world, but it gives you the data. You've got enrollment by grade level over there on the left, and then enrollment by school over on the right. So you can see where there's some higher numbers in some of those schools and definitely some higher numbers as you get up to the upper elementary grades.
and have these families committed for the semester or for the year?
These students are committed for the semester. Okay, so there's enrollment numbers. I think also, just to round out the update, I want to share the schedule for this year because it does look a little bit different than last year. I think there's a few key points to note here. This schedule is consistent for all elementary Lula classes because our student population is much different than it was last year. We have some classes this year with students from up to 7 or 8 different elementary schools, in contrast to last year when our classes had most, if not all, students from the same home school. And so what that allows us to do is build in some very intentional pieces in the schedule to allow for services that need to be provided for students who are enrolled in Lula. So you'll notice that this schedule gives us an opportunity to feature what we call a win time for each grade level. And you can see that the 3-5 schedule is similar. And that you have those times built in for each grade level throughout the day. WIN, W-I-N, there's an acronym for us. What I need time, those are the orange blocks there. So students receiving resource, services, intervention, ESOL, or gifted services can be pulled by the service provider during that time. And that's also time that teachers can engage with their students in small group work and independent support outside of their main lessons for the day. I think it's also important to understand that the larger blocks of time there in the schedule for writing, reading, math, workshop, and science and social studies, they're designed to give teachers a good bit of flexibility in determining what that balance between live instruction and small group independent work would be for students. You know, it's important we don't have students or teachers sitting on a Zoom live for 6 hours a day, but they still do need to have several opportunities each day to connect and engage with the teacher and their peers, so balance is key. Finally, each teacher has the same planning time at the end of the day, which is, I think, really important as we're pulling together a new group of teachers. This is going to allow them to collaborate with their other Lula counterparts and participate in professional learning and support sessions that will be provided by our central services supports for them each week. So it's only day one. I'm anxious to look at feedback from today in more detail. From what I've seen so far, we've had some natural technical issues on the first day, like you would expect. We need to iron those out, but overall the input from our teachers has been very positive from today. They're reporting their students and families are excited and enthusiastic when they're getting on those Zoom calls to get the school year started today and begin learning. And they're showing high levels of comfort with using the technology and building upon their experiences from last year. And so that's, I think, notable in that we're able to build upon the growth that both our teachers and our families and our students experienced last year in working with technology and learning online. At this time, I'm happy to answer any questions. All right. Thank you for your time, Mr. Raven.
Good evening, Madam Chair, board members, Dr. Little. I think Howard will probably agree with me that it is a great time to be a Lula Llama. I can assure you that I have never found myself in a situation where I actually string those words together, but it is very true. In regards to the secondary Lula Academy, our theme for the year is igniting a path to the future. We believe that we are building a tremendous program and offering a product to families that will allow all students to truly be college and career ready. Our middle school currently has an enrollment of 187 students. That number has changed pretty drastically since the beginning of the summer. We've grown our middle school by nearly 60 students, mostly in the past 2 weeks. We are fortunate to have 10 dedicated teachers housed at Lexington Middle School. We have 2 grade 6 teachers who teach all core classes. They have a common planning time. We have 4 grade 7 through 8 teachers who as well have a common planning time during the day. And then we have PE, resource, Spanish, and music appreciation teachers. We also are fortunate to have 2 virtual learning labs through Virtual South Carolina One is a course entitled Introduction to Career Clusters. The other is Exploring World Languages in South Carolina, which gives additional exploratory options to our middle school students. In addition, our middle school students do have access to high school credits through Algebra 1 Honors, English 1 Honors, Geometry, French, and Spanish. Last night, we did host an open house at Lexington Middle School for the Lula Middle School families. We had nearly 100 students and families show up. We were tremendously excited about what we were able to provide there. And we had a very structured program that broke us up into a 6th grade session in which we were able to talk about the logistics of getting online, what programs to look for, how to use the computer, giving passwords, and also a session available for how to be a good virtual student, organizational skills, parent input and students and how they flex their day. So we were very excited about the opportunity to give that last night and the turnout that we had. And I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't acknowledge Barbara Johnson, who is the Lula Middle School counselor, and Nicole Kriminger, who is the Lula Middle School teacher. Both of them have done a fantastic job over the summer, enrolling students, preparing a great program, putting together good opportunities for students. In much to Howard's point, the issues that we heard today were largely technical in nature. Families making sure they had the right password to get on, but the overwhelming consensus after speaking to the teachers at the end of the day and many of the families as well was it was a very good experience for them, and I'm very proud of that. Our high school, we are close to 300 students in grades 9 through 12. At the beginning of the summer, that number was about 180. So as well, that number has grown fairly significantly. Our high school structure is different than the middle school. We have 18 adjunct teachers spread throughout the district. So in other words, what we may have is a teacher at Lexington High School who in the fall semester would have 2 blocks of Lula virtual instruction and a block of face-to-face. In the spring semester, they may have 2 blocks of face-to-face and 1 block of Lula. So we're able to spread that around throughout the district, and those are all the teachers who had expressed an interest in remaining involved in the Lula program. We are licensing virtual South Carolina courses for teachers to use. We had initially thought of allowing teachers to create their own content, but given the circumstances and the drastic, well, not so drastic, but the input that we were getting from folks in the spring semester, we felt like at least for this next year, probably wise to continue with our contract from Virtual South Carolina. Their standards level courses, the content is very accessible, and the teachers have the ability to manipulate the content as needed. We offer advanced placement honors and CTE courses through Lula. There are dual enrollment options as well. And we offer services to students who are served in self-contained classes to make sure that they have virtual learning opportunities. And in talking about the high school, I do have to mention Rachel Miller. She is my lead teacher in the Lula High School, and Ann Haywood is the high school counselor for Lula, and she has done an absolutely phenomenal job this week and throughout the summer and throughout the entire process of building the Lula program for our students. But, you know, again, we're just very excited to be in this situation, and I want to share with you an email I received from a parent today. She said her daughter joined 2 Zoom sessions today with Mr. Stamey and Miss Waldy, both of which are Lula High School teachers. Both teachers were so enthusiastic, very organized. Just want you to know that as a teacher, this just made me super happy to see how excited they were about this new year. As a parent, I appreciate how these 2 teachers got everything off to such a great start and how interactive they were, making connections with their students. I know how important that is for classroom success. My daughter felt so relieved to know that these 2 caring teachers would be supporting him with my student this year. We both look forward to hearing more about the Learning Lab tomorrow and her other courses. So I was very, very excited to get that at the end of the day and to hear that the positive connections are being made. With that being said, does anyone have any questions? Thank you much.
Fantastic work. And I just wanted to add one of the interesting elements to this, the middle school and the high school programs are really the ongoing, the people who are signing up for those programs initially were not doing so as a response to COVID. This was their preferred learning experience, And that's one of the things we took from last year, is that there are a number of students who really excel in this experience, but we also wanted to make sure we could make that experience. So
You're
thank
absolutely
you.
right. Our vision of it was to be a school of choice for students, and we still want to definitely continue with that, and we want to accommodate as many needs as we can.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank you very much, Mr. Rabin.
Thank you.
Okay, and batting cleanup on our back-to-school update today. As you can imagine, she's been quite the popular person today. I'm sure her phone has rung quite a bit. But I'd like to introduce, I guess, the person who needs no introduction, but just for everyone else who are watching at home, Director of Nursing, Amy Wood. And we are thankful. Let me just say thank you so much for you and your team and your efforts in helping us stay safe over these last 18 months and the work you've already done this summer and to start the school year. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nurse Wood, if you would, kind of walk us through where we are with DHEC, kind of where we are currently with quarantines and isolations, and catch us up with all that information, please.
Sure. So we started today, our first day of school. I need to be louder. It just needs to be shorter. We started today, our first day of school, with just over 500 students already out in quarantine or isolation. So that means they missed out on their very first day of school. Over 500. We added another roughly 150 to 160 today. When I came down to the meeting, it was at 150, but the nurses have been continuously updating things just since we started this. And so it's going to be about 160 that we add to that number that have been quarantined and isolated. So we are starting in a very different place than where we started last year in terms of the impact to our students. And I just wanted to start out with letting people know why we do contact tracing, because there seems to be some misunderstanding as to, are you doing it because there's funding tied to it? Are you doing it because it's just a policy that the school came up with or the district came up with? And I want to point out that it actually is law. So DHEC has the weight of law, and you can find that as it pertains to us in this particular situation in 44-1-140, and it specifically instructs DHEC to, for lack of a better way of saying it, determine which infectious diseases and communicable diseases need to have action taken and what those actions are. And so Regulation 6120 is a very long document that goes into detail about a lot of things that DHEC does in terms of communicable diseases. The section that pertains to schools is really Section 12. And the main thing that it does is it authorizes DHEC to annually publish the child and school exclusion list, the child care and school exclusion list. And that is basically the framework for all that we do in terms of excluding kids and staff from our schools based on contagious or infectious diseases. And I will point out that it does specifically say that no superintendent, no teacher, no principal, no parent, no one has the authority to have someone come back into one of these public, private, parochial, or church schools or daycares unless they meet the requirements that DHEC sets forth. And so we are starting with that as our framework of understanding why we do contact tracing now. So this link is one of the sites on the DHEC COVID-19 page. It actually deals with schools and child care centers. All of our guidance documents are housed there. That's what we go by whenever we have to figure out how we're doing something. DHEC doesn't really give us a lot of leeway in us. I don't know if that's me or not, or if that's the storm coming, but DHEC doesn't really give us a lot of leeway in how we can interpret this. In fact, there are really only two things that they allow us to make a choice on. And one of those is whether or not we allow early returns from quarantine in our district, and the other is consideration for 3 positives in a cohort or class within a 14-day period, and everyone being quarantined after that. And so we basically have adopted everything that DHEC has given to us as how we are going to operate. If you have it on your computer, or if you want to look for this website, this particular page, I encourage everyone to bookmark it because it's got great resources and it gives you the revision date for all of those guidance documents so you can know that you are looking at the most updated one. I'm not going to go into isolation because there's really no difference this year than there was last year. Isolation is still someone who has symptoms of COVID-19 or who has tested positive. They are out for those 10 days from the time their symptoms began or their test was collected. If they're asymptomatic, there's no change in that. The quarantine, the biggest change from last year to this year is that a school close contact, that definition has been created and it's been altered a little bit. So for us last year, we quarantined students who were within 6 feet of a positive case during their contagious period if they were there for 15 minutes or more, cumulative or consecutive. Now that has been shortened to 3 feet. So we will be quarantining students in our schools if they are within 3 feet of someone who tests positive for 15 minutes or more, consecutive or cumulative, during their contagious period. So that narrows down how many we hopefully are going to be quarantining. We do have, DHEC says that those who are fully vaccinated do not have to quarantine. They do recommend that they test 3 to 5 days after exposure and wear a mask, either for all 14 days of that quarantine period or until they get a negative test. It is not required. We have a letter that we will send out to parents if their child is fully vaccinated to let them know of the exposure and to let them know of those recommendations from DHEC, but those are not required, so we are not going to enforce those on everyone. Positive test within 90 days of that close contact exposure, that's a PCR or antigen test. It is not an antibody test. So if you have a positive PCR or antigen test within 90 days of your exposure, you do not have to quarantine. However, DHEC says that you do have to wear a mask during those 14 days. If you are not fully vaccinated and if you do not have a positive antigen or PCR test within 90 days of that exposure, you will be quarantined. And you fit that school close contact definition, you will be quarantined. The standard quarantine from DHEC and CDC is still 14 days. As I said before, our district has opted to allow for early return from quarantine whenever possible. There are several options. One is to return after 7 days in quarantine. That requires a negative test. The other is to end quarantine after 10 days. Both of them require the person to have no symptoms during that quarantine period. If a parent chooses an early return option, they are choosing all of the things that come with that. That means they are choosing to have their child wear a mask for the duration of the 14-day quarantine. They are choosing for their child to be socially distant during class and lunch for the duration of that 14-day period, and they are choosing to allow their child to be screened at school by the nurse or someone in the health room for COVID symptoms for the duration of that 14-day quarantine period. They do not have to choose those. If they don't want to choose any of those, we have the 14-day quarantine. No one is required to come back early from quarantine. I want to point out that although we allow that at the district level and we have given our schools the knowledge of what they need to do, it is not always feasible in every situation. And so we have given the schools the autonomy to make those decisions at their level because they know any restrictions that may exist in a certain classroom or in their buildings. They know the restrictions and the limitations, and we give them the autonomy. We have just said as a district that we allow early returns.
I think one important point of clarity that I see a lot of confusion within the community is the 7-day, at the 7-day mark. So for an asymptomatic person who has been a close contact and has been quarantined, the preferred test is a PCR test, okay? If you do a rapid test, the test sensitivity drops down to about 40%, so it's not incredibly accurate, okay? So if you're asymptomatic, you get a PCR test, but here's the kicker. It normally takes about 2 days to get a PCR test back. And so that's why they say you should not test before day 5, and it should be a PCR test. So it requires a lot of planning is the point, you know, that if you're a parent who has had and your child is a close contact, you should be planning on a PCR test on day 5 with a return of that negative test, potentially day 6, likely day 7, if you're looking to return on day 8, and it's feasible within the school. And you've had that communication with the school nurse administrators, so on and so forth.
Yes, and that's why when we initiate the conversation with the parent, we typically will tell them, if you are interested, because we can't tell you on the front end that your child can come back on this day because they may develop symptoms on day 3. So there needs to be a follow-up conversation, you know, because if the parent says, well, as long as we stay symptom-free, I would like to, you know, possibly look at that. Then the school can also be planning to see, okay, is this feasible? Because that's not a rapid turnaround decision either. So it's not that a parent can come in and say, look, I read about this, my child got a negative test on day 5, we're here on day 8, and let's go. Because that does typically take some planning from the school side as well.
And I think the important distinction there as well is that this is in response to a behavioral change that the CDC recommended this because so many people were not staying in quarantine for 14 days. Trust me, there are plenty of people who convert on day 13, plenty. And so that's why the symptom screening has to occur between days 8 and 14 is because we know there's a certain percentage that are going to be positive between days 8 and 14, but you would rather have 10 or 20% as opposed to 90% who won't stay in quarantine. And so it was really more of a behavioral change to marry up with what they were seeing in the community.
Amy, would you mind just to share the adult close contact difference in the guidelines?
Yes, so for the adults, and I apologize because we struck a deal last year with HR. They handle the adults, we handle the kids. We do work very closely together, though. So for an adult, for a staff member in our schools, it is still 6 feet. So they will still be, you can have the same person and have a student at 6 feet and a staff member at 6 feet. The student will not be quarantined, but the staff member will. I cannot tell you the rationale behind that. I can only tell you that that is what they have shared with us, and that is what we have to go by. So for symptomatic exclusions, I know this has been something that's ongoing. This hasn't actually changed the automatic exclusions, and then for the secondary symptoms that we typically see. So automatic exclusions with or without fever. This is what DHEC says. If someone has these, they have to be excluded as a COVID-like illness, and they have to go through that either 10-day isolation period, get a negative test, or get an alternate diagnosis from a doctor. It's new or worsening cough, new loss of taste or smell, shortness of breath, or difficulty breathing. Now, there is a caveat to that if it is due to a known underlying condition, we don't have to automatically exclude. So if your child has asthma and they come into the health room and they complain that they have, you know, some shortness of breath or their chest feels tight, and the nurse administers their inhaler and it clears it up, guess what? That was due to the asthma. So we do not have to exclude for that automatically every time your child needs their inhaler. If your child doesn't have that diagnosis though, and they come in and they have a new cough, your child is going to be excluded because DHEC says that is a COVID-like symptom and they need to be automatically excluded. And so you have those same three options: a 10-day isolation, you can get a negative test, or you can get an alternate diagnosis from your doctor. The other symptoms, those are the ones I really want to focus on because those are more at the nurse's discretion. Fever, chills, fatigue, muscle or body aches, headaches, sore throat, congestion, runny nose, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. I can't tell you how many, especially elementary kids, may have had a headache today. Because it's the first day of school, they're a little anxious, they may or may not have eaten a good breakfast, they probably haven't had anything to drink all day. So typically, that's not something that I think on the first day of school anyone is going to send someone home for. However, if you come to school and you have a sore throat, a headache, congestion, and runny nose, as a nurse, I would be hard-pressed, knowing what our community spread level is, I would be hard-pressed to excuse those symptoms at this point in the school year. And so our nurses, I just want to reiterate, are professional nurses. They do an assessment of the student. They know what's happening in their school. They know what's happening in these classrooms. They know what's happening in the community. And so when we leave it to the nurse's discretion, we are leaving it to professionals to say, I think this meets the criteria. Your child may be excluded from school based on nothing but a collection of secondary symptoms. And so that's what we really want to communicate with parents, that can happen. And we just want to let everyone know that we're not doing it to penalize anyone. We're trying to do it to keep as many people safe as possible. Are there any questions?
Is this available on the website?
It is.
Okay.
I will say, DHEC is not known for putting everything in one document. So there are several documents that guide what we do. The school and child care exclusion list is kind of the no ifs, ands, or buts. If you're on here, that's it. The guidance documents, like the interim guidance for cases, management of cases in schools, and the interim guidance for K through 12 operations, that's basically how you implement what they are saying in the school and child care exclusion list. But they are all on that website. They are all linked as documents on that website that I referenced.
So,
I've already asked our web person to add her
okay, that's what I was asking
presentation
about.
as well, because it is, really concise.
Right, yeah, that was very thorough. So I just wanted to make sure that this was available, what you presented tonight.
Oh.
Yes, all in one place, so people had access to it. Thank you. And
I
Catherine,
just
too.
want to say that your presentation, your sound effects were wonderful.
And then any recommendations representing the voices of all our school nurses around the district around vaccinations and wearing masks?
Yes, please.
What would your
If your
recommendation
child
be?
is age 12 or up, I would suggest that you speak with your child's health care provider to see if a vaccination is appropriate for them and get it if they say yes. If your child is attending our schools, I will freely volunteer. I am fully vaccinated and have been since the very beginning. And I have to appreciate Lexington Medical Center for giving us that opportunity so early in the process. But you see that I have gone back to wearing a mask because it protects me, but it also protects others, because maybe I am one of those breakthrough cases, and I don't want to do anything to anyone else. And so I would encourage every parent to send their child to school with a mask.
And to, during the peak of COVID last year, I had maybe one patient a week with COVID. One a week, maybe one every other week. Now I'm seeing 1 to 2 a day personally. I was, the last 3 of my 4 patients were COVID positive. So we can't run the same playbook that we ran a year ago. I think that's the take-home message. Everybody wants to say, well, I mean, I'm telling you, it's a different story. A virus is a very living thing, and it does what living things do. It wants to survive and it wants to reproduce. And so it's going to find a place to do that. And a year ago, it was adults, vulnerable adults. A fair number of those adults have now been vaccinated, so guess what? Now it's time for the kids, and that's exactly what we're seeing. I've never gotten a daily update from Children's Hospital ever, and I have gotten one for the past month, well, 3 weeks now. We are getting daily updates about the number of students who are in the hospital with COVID, and they're not just there because they've got a little pneumonia. You know, there are some who are pretty sick, and so it's just not the same play it was a year ago. I wish it were, I really do, but it's not.
Those updates share the capacity at our children's hospital, so both Prism
Correct.
and MUC. What's their capacity right now?
So capacity, basically 100% of the PICU beds are full. Their ED, just today, they actually didn't have a patient waiting in the ED to go to the PICU. So that means they were holding a patient who needed to be in ICU. They were holding them in the emergency department.
Pediatric patient, correct?
Pediatric patient, until a bed became available in the ICU. And then on the floor, they fluctuate anywhere from 85 to 95% capacity. And the dreaded fear is always, the dreaded fear is that you get in a car accident and there's no place for you to go. Okay, imagine that. Imagine that you're sick with something else other than COVID and you have nowhere to go. I mean, that's a stark reality and not one we face a whole. It's very rare for a children's hospital to go on diversion. Very rare that they have to begin diverting patients elsewhere. But we have certainly seen it.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you again, Amy, and all of your support.